This is now day number 11 of the conflict or the war, or as Donald Trump would like to characterize it as, an excursion into Iran. And one of the questions I think that's on the minds of a lot of people is that they're asking the question, is this going to cause widespread inflation, not only in the United States, but across the globe? And I think that's a very, very fair question. I'm going to take a look at that in much more detail in just a moment. Firstly, I think it's very, very important for context to look at what happened in the futures market as of last Sunday night. Today being Wednesdays, so I'm talking about last Sunday night. We saw crude oil shoot to up 27% in the futures market overnight. Brent crude oil went up almost 25%. Natural gas went up 8.24%. So there was a lot of concern as people were observing the futures market. They're saying this is actually astounding and it's unprecedented. And this was not only affecting energy prices, but that very same evening, if you looked at the futures market for commodities, there was also a very, very significant bump up in the price of commodities. Cocoa went up 5.73%. Palm oil went up 3.72%. Canola oil, 3.17%. Sugar went up almost 3%. Wheat went up 2.5%, just about. Corn went up 2.16%. Soybeans went up 2.14%. Butter, 2.14%. Coffee, 1.56%. Rice, 1.02%. Sunflower oil, 1.02%. Now, this was, and I'm just giving you a sampling. There were others, of course, that the direction was markedly up. That gave a lot of rise to concern. When you combine those two figures in the futures market last Sunday night, we're looking at catastrophic increases overnight in the price of crude oil, as well as basic commodities. And a lot of those basic commodities that I mentioned are inherent in many, many other products. So this is quite concerning. Now, Donald Trump, he watched this and he said to himself, I'm sure, something like this. He said, I have to address Wall Street. And I'm going to do that on Monday, this past Monday, at 5:30 p.m. And well, he should have. And let's be clear that he was not speaking to John and Mary, the average people who lived in the average suburb of some average city inside of the United States. He was talking to, at 5:30 p.m., he was talking to Wall Street, not Main Street. If he wanted to talk to Main Street, he would have arranged an address to the people from the Oval Office and would have addressed this situation and the war and the rising prices. He would have done that from the Oval Office, but he didn't. He chose to do a press conference at 5:30 p.m. when the market was closed, and he's going to attempt to try to get everybody just to calm down. And to some extent, it worked. When he gave his press conference, he made market efforts to try to portray that there's nothing to worry about here. We are the most powerful country in the world, and we have the situation at hand. You might as well say that this situation is over, this excursion is over, the war is over. everybody, don't worry, be happy. That was his underlying message. And he made references to the Strait of Hormuz, which has, 20% of the world's oil supply go through it, and as well as 30% of the world's natural gas, liquefied natural gas, is going through that Strait of Hormuz. So he's trying to get everybody to calm down, and he's essentially saying to people that, you have nothing to worry about. We're very powerful. This conflict is almost over. You might as well say it's over. And lo and behold, a couple of days later, what has happened? Now you see, as of this morning, there were 3 vessels that were struck with projectiles inside of the Strait of Hormuz. I think this sort of preempts any notion now that the Strait of Hormuz is going to normalize, because Donald Trump exclaims that the United States has a big stick and they have the best minesweepers, and I think all the evidence points to the likelihood that the Strait of Hormuz is not going to normalize until this conflict is pretty much completely over. And I think to jump to any conclusion that it's going to end very quickly, I think the longer this goes on, the more likely that it will not end quicker, more later than sooner. During that press conference, Donald Trump actually said this, and to me this is just jaw-dropping. See, here you have this hotbed conflict where ships are reticent to carry their cargo, or their oil or their gas. They're reticent to go into this strait because they're concerned for their own safety. And Donald Trump actually said this. He called on oil tanker crews in the Gulf to show some guts, quote unquote, show some guts, and push through raging war to deliver your payload. Does he actually think that because he said that the ships, the owners of the ships, and the crew members will be willing to risk going into a war zone, will be willing to risk becoming a target because Donald Trump said, have some guts? I mean, maybe Donald should send Barron. What do you think of this idea? Maybe he should send Barron to be one of the crew members on one of those ships. And in hindsight, ask Donald Trump how he feels about his son Barron being on one of those ships. I think if, hypothetically, you pose that question, I think you might get a completely different narrative from Donald Trump. Now, as of this morning, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that there were 3 ships that were hit by projectiles near the Strait of Hormuz, and 3 crew members are now missing. I think that's a game changer. They're not going to jump back in to the Strait of Hormuz anytime soon. Again, when the conflict subsides, when there is stability inside of Iran, that is when and perhaps a new government that is committed to peace, I think then and only then is the Strait of Hormuz going to normalize. So now I think the big question on the minds of a lot of people, and I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an economist, and I do have some background and some education economically, but I am not an economist. So this is subjective and this is based on my opinion, but I can share with you what I know. If you look at this rise in oil prices, some people mistakenly think that this started on March the 1st, when Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu launched their quote unquote excursion. I think it's pretty funny that they call it an excursion. The only reason they don't call it a special operation is because Vladimir Putin already stole that. And remember, the Putin thing was the invasion of Ukraine was supposed to last, according to Vladimir Putin, 3 days, a week, and the people of Ukraine will throw roses at us and we're going to liberate them. And how did that turn out? Here we are 5 years later, and that bloody conflict is still going on. And I dare say one of the reasons it is going on is because Donald Trump, the one who said, I'm going to end it in 24 hours, does not have the intestinal fortitude to finish Vladimir Putin off. Because the economy in Russia is in a shambles. You know, that's another video for another day. But suffice it to say, for right now, Vladimir Putin is on the ropes economically. And Russia is postured to collapse. And what does Donald Trump do? In the face of this crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, he decides, oh, well, we're going to temporarily relieve the sanctions on Russian oil to help the bigger picture. Right. So let me get this straight. So what you actually mean, Donald J. Trump, is that to alleviate a problem which you created along with your buddy Benjamin Netanyahu, you are going to throw fuel on the fire in Ukraine by giving or taking the sanctions off of Russian oil so that Vladimir Putin can build up his financial wherewithal to build up his war chest again, which is nearing being replete. Did I get that right? Okay, so by trying to solve an economic problem for the globe, you want to dump that on Ukraine and you want to prolong that conflict. I got it. I think I understand perfectly. It's very important to understand that this rise in oil prices did not start when the conflict started on March 1st. It started on February the 17th, when there was the anticipation that there was going to be a conflict arising inside or surrounding the Iran situation, and oil prices went from approximately, let's say, about $63 a barrel, and started to rise quite dramatically over a short period of time, up to today, where it hit as high as $95 at one point, and today has dropped down to about the $85 level. What this means is that over the course of 22 days, not 11, as Donald Trump would have you believe, over the course of 22 days, we have had about a 38% increase in fuel, in crude oil. Okay? So now you have to ask yourself the question, 22 days of a 38% rise in crude oil prices. Where is the tipping point? At what point do CEOs around the globe and corporations make the decision that the cost of everything that we shift, the cost of our fuel to run our trucks, the cost of airline fuel, the cost of plastics, which somewhat relies on crude oil prices. I mean, at what point does the inflation and rising prices start to kick in? Again, I'm not an economist, but I will say this, that we are, if we're not already here, we are reaching a little bit of a tipping point. And at some point, that inflation is going to kick in. And as all of you know, because look, we all buy things, we all buy food, we all buy consumer products, and we all know this, that when prices rise, they take the elevator. And when we're hoping that prices go down, they don't take the elevator, they take the stairs. This could result in interest rate hikes again. I think the days of the rate cuts may be over. We may be looking at substantive increases to battle the inflation that this situation is creating. And I venture to say that the longer this conflict or war, or Donald Trump makes it sound so cute, it's a little excursion, we're off on a picnic. The longer it goes on, the greater the inflation risk becomes. Now, as of today, I'm going to leave you with this thought. As of today, it was reported that they're going to release 400 million barrels of oil. Okay, now I watched the crude oil market and how it reacted to this. And interestingly enough, so far, the crude oil market did not even flinch. It's been hovering around $85 a barrel pretty much all morning long, which may suggest, this is spitballing and this is just speculation, it may suggest, and I've heard this on 680 News, that it might be suggesting that the release of the strategic oil reserves to the tune of 400 million barrels, what that may be suggesting is that the release of those barrels of oil are already baked into the current price. So we may have to get used to $85 a barrel moving forward. And I don't see the price of oil dropping significantly from this point forward. I hope I could offer you some insights as to what may be going on here, and hope I gave you something to think about. I'll be watching this situation in the Strait of Hormuz with great interest, and I'll be happy to share my insights as things develop. I also would like to thank all of you people who have subscribed to this channel with my heartfelt thanks. It's one of the things that helps us to keep going. So if you wouldn't mind doing me a favor, is hit that subscribe button and hit that like button. Those likes really help with our exposure, because as the algorithms detect more likes, then they start to give us more profile and more exposure. So I'm going to thank everybody in advance for that too. You have a wonderful day. Bye-bye for now.